It is Tuesday, August 11th, 2026, coming to you from America's beautiful North Coast, from the shores of Lake Superior. This is The American Descent. I'm your host, Sam Martin.
And I'm Jen Schultz.
On today's show, I had a chance to sit down with Joel Sipress, a historian and a founding member of the DSA here in the Twin Ports region of Duluth and Superior. It's a fascinating discussion where we talk about what is the DSA, what's its history, and what's it doing in the Democratic Party. Hopefully you'll stick around for our conversation with Joel Sipress. In the news today, Donald Trump signed an executive order canceling many vaccinations for children. This is obviously very dangerous, and medical professionals are very worried about what this might portend for the spread of disease and the safety of not just the kids that are no longer getting these vaccinations, but also the kids who can't get vaccinations due to various allergies. Today is primary day in the upper Midwest, along with Connecticut and South Carolina. Wisconsin and Minnesota Democratic voters are going to the polls today. In Wisconsin, it's a contested gubernatorial primary featuring the DSA candidate Francesca Hong, who is polling well ahead of the candidate that the establishment Democrats have coalesced around only within the last couple of weeks after the two previous coalescing candidates already have dropped out of the race. In Minnesota, it's the race we've talked about many times between Angie Craig and Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. The polls are a lot tighter in that race of what polls we do have. However, it appears as of this hour, turnout is very high, which seems to suggest good news for Peggy Flanagan. Meanwhile, in Connecticut, a closely watched gubernatorial primary there, as well as the longtime Governor Ned Lamont, who back in the day was a little bit more to the left, has centered himself a little bit more. He faces a strong challenger from the left. And also, long-time Representative John Larson, who represents Hartford in the area around the capital of Connecticut, is facing a much younger challenger to his right, who is backed by the crypto industry. So that is one to watch as well. On the GOP side, in Minnesota, there's a contested gubernatorial primary, which all eyes are probably going to be on because it involves Mike My Pillow Lindell, who has been ahead in the polls the entire time, has the endorsement of Donald Trump and pretty much nobody else. He's probably going to win this one, folks. Meanwhile, in South Carolina, the special election primary to replace the now deceased Senator Lindsey Graham is up today, and Lindsey Graham's sister is actually running for this seat, which has angered a lot of people in the Republican Party who thought that they were going to be up next after Lindsey Graham's eventual retirement. So that will be another interesting one to watch. There's a lot of other news, but primary day is kind of taking the cake for today. This and other things to discuss on today's Descent. Well, Jen, you've been waiting to vote until the day of, right?
I did. I just voted, and it was super busy at my polling location. But in my precinct, we have the highest voter turnout in our community. And so I wasn't surprised that it was busy. And I voted. And so I think in Minnesota, the last record turnout in a primary was, I want to say 2018, and it was 22.8%. So to beat that, we need to get above that percentage. And, Minnesota already has high voter turnout in the general election. So I think, it would be great to get more folks out. And I do think it will help Peggy Flanagan if young people come out and vote and higher turnout in the metro areas. But it's going to be a squeaker. I'm not going to be reliant on the polls that have put Peggy pretty far ahead. I think it's going to be extremely close. That's what the exit polls look like right now as well.
Well, if you remember when we had our conversation with Duke and Patty, Duke mentioned that the KSTP, which leans Republican, well, they had the last poll to come out, and it showed Angie Craig with a 3-point lead. So we'll see. I mean,
We'll see. But I
so
don't. You
much
really
money
think
came in at
Lindell's
the
going to
end.
win? I don't think Lindell's going to win. I just
You
don't think
don't?
Republicans. I just don't think they're going to. If they, and I think they're going to show up at the polls. I just don't think they want him to be their governor. Trump
I
might,
don't know
but
about
I don't
I
think
don't
the
know about
average
that.
Republican in Minnesota. We'll see. I just don't think we're that. They're that extreme.
I mean, it's not been a heavily polled race, and you're right. We need to take all this polling with a massive grain of salt, but the only polling we have shows him far and away taking this thing.
Well,
So,
gosh.
and just like it shows Francesca Hahn far and away taking this thing in Wisconsin. And I will say, Jen and I won't go into a deep dive on this because in my interview today with Joel Sipress, please stick around. It's such a good introduction into what is the DSA, what is its history, and also like what is it a party? Is it a movement? What's it doing inside the Democratic Party? All that kind of stuff. We get into all that. It's a fascinating, not just history lesson, but we go over the dynamics of both the Minnesota Senate race with Peggy Flanagan and Angie Craig, as well as, and I would say even more importantly, we go into the dynamics in Wisconsin. And Joel is an expert on both those states and their political histories and their political presence, as it were. So, but, Jen, the reason the Connecticut one interests me is I lived there for 6 years in Hartford, and I moved to Connecticut in 2005, and John Larson was my congressman then. He's been the congressman there for forever. And he's one of the rare examples of, and very similar to Ed Markey in Massachusetts, where Ed Markey's got a much younger Seth Moulton's running against him, much younger, but from the right. He's running against Ed Markey from the right. Well, John Larson is experiencing, he's 74, I think, but he's experiencing something very similar. And he's been the representative in Hartford since, 1998. But he's been one of the strongest defenders of, the Great Society stuff, Medicare, Medicaid, all that kind of.
I was just
Social
talking to my
Security.
neighbor today who's in his early 80s, been retired for a long time, and he's a Democrat. I don't know if he was always a Democrat, but he wants all these older people to retire. He wants them to, go retire, enjoy your life. He wants younger people in Congress. So
I
it's
get
really
that.
interesting to hear someone older who's like, yeah, we need new blood. We need fresh ideas. And we need folks that want to actually get something done and change it up. So we'll see if that happens in that race.
I fully agree with that up until the point where the policies don't, where it's bad policy. I mean, if John Larson has been fighting his whole career to keep Medicare, Medicaid, all that kind of stuff safe from Republican tampering, and this new guy is, basically a crypto guy. And by the way, I really believe that if these crypto people, these AI people, all that kind of stuff, if that wins, Jen, it could cause severe and irreparable harm to these programs, because it means that institutional investors, including the United States government, will be expected to invest money in what are essentially scams.
Ugh, let's save that for another day. So
Okay.
you forgot to mention North Carolina, where they had to pick the replacement for Chuck Edwards, and they picked Jennifer Belcom. And I think that was a good pick for Republicans. I think she's got name recognition. She's a state representative, I believe. And there are some other dudes were running, and given everything that's happened with Chuck and other men like Max Miller, they went with the female candidate.
Right. Well, we have never mentioned Chuck Edwards because his story is salacious, but it's not quite as dramatic as the Max Miller thing in Ohio, and he did step down. But yeah,
Chuck
he's
did, but Max didn't. Max Miller didn't. He's running.
Yeah.
It's too late for them to replace him. That was
Yesterday.
or Monday.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, no, Chuck Edwards is, credibly accused of sexual assault.
There's evidence of these strange text messages he sent to many of his staff, would, show up at their house. It was just like stalking almost. But He resigned. He did the right thing because he was in front of an ethics panel and they had been investigating these claims for many, many months. Now, that won't happen. The ethics committee doesn't have enough time to do that for Representative Max Miller. So Republicans are stuck with him. So that is a seat that we can pick up in Ohio. And Poindexter is the Democrat running against him.
Right. And the polls have flipped. Just within a few days, they've flipped.
Wow.
And
So
Poindexter
I think
is
there's
running,
like 84. Are we like 84 days out from the general? Something like that?
something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
I remember
So
when it was
these new
100 days a couple
Republicans,
weeks
this
ago.
new Jennifer Belcom doesn't have a lot of time to raise money, and her opponent, the Democrat,
This is in North Carolina. Yeah.
North Carolina, I think raised $2 million. So it could be a competitive race too. But I mean, it's a safe Trump district in the Western Mountains Hills country.
Yeah. I mean, there are some people who thought or think still that Democrats might have a chance with that South Carolina Senate seat. I'm barely, Jen, getting myself around to the idea that Democrats might possibly win in Texas. Not that Nate Silver is the end all be all, but he's moved Texas into lean Democratic. It's just kind of shocking.
Mm-hmm.
Where things have gone.
I'm ready to be shocked in November.
Well, if this is a true wave election year, as a lot of people think it will be, and anything can change. I mean, 84 days is still a very long time in politics, and things can be said, things can be done. It's like, who knows? But what I think, and obviously there's this conversation coming up with Joel about the DSA, and one of the things Joel talks about that I hope, please pay attention, and this comes towards the end of the interview, but we talk about electability, because this is the argument a lot of people have against the DSA is they're not electable. So Joel's response to that is, first of all, candidate quality matters. You can be a crappy candidate on the left and not win. You can be a crappy moderate candidate and not win. But also, I mean, he's pretty clear that, a moderate candidate can find a way to be electable, and a candidate on the left can find a way to be electable, but it has to do with where you ground yourself. The thing about a lot of these DSA candidates that are running and winning is they're really grounded in a firm commitment to a policy roadmap. I mean, they know exactly what they want to stand for, and they repeat it over and over and over. A lot of their success is that they're relentlessly on message, which, in Minnesota here, since we know a lot about that race because we see a lot about it, Peggy and Angie. Peggy is relentlessly on message. I have seen her stump speech now way too many times, several of them in person. It's relentlessly on message. Relentlessly. And that's how Zoran Mamdani won. That's how Abdul El Sayed won. Francesca Hong is relentlessly on message.
And that message, being on message, is going to help them against Republicans in November, because what message?
It's a clear message, by the way.
Republicans don't have a message. I mean, does Trump have a message? I mean, no. He has no message anymore. People don't understand what he's saying. We're opening up the streets.
He ran on no new wars.
He's done the opposite of everything he said he wanted to do, but they are so off message right now. They are in disarray, and Republicans should be worried in their races if they're in I would say a +8 Trump district. Those folks should be worried.
Right, and the message coming from the more establishment Democratic candidates, and we'll go over this with Joel as well, but just to preview it, is I'll fight against Trump, elect me because I'll win. And that's it. That's not it. I mean, that is a message, but it's not like, who does that connect with? Democrats have been running now for 10 years, Jen, on fighting Trump. And look how much good it's done.
I want to know, what are you going to do to help my family? What are you running for? We know we're all against Trump. I mean, that's a given. If you're a Democrat, you're going to challenge Trump. But what are you going to do to make my life better? That's what they want to know. So, you got to have a platform.
Yeah, this vaccination thing is really
Oh,
gross.
well, first of all, let me clarify. So he wants to put more time between these individual vaccinations. So there's something called MMR, which combines measles, mumps, and rubella. And they want to divide that up, but there's no manufacturer of the vaccine that it's separate. The only thing you can get on the market is this combined vaccination. And what Trump's executive order is, parents should be able to space out these vaccinations if they want to schedule vaccinations. Well, that's going to be impossible to do, and you don't really want to delay the MMR vaccination. You want to protect children. So it
But
can be very dangerous.
he wants to get rid of requirements for Hep B, for flu, and for COVID. Completely get rid of those requirements anywhere.
Yeah. But this other one was spacing out some of these vaccination schedules. So I think parents should talk to their doctor and get advice from their pediatricians and their physicians. They should not be getting medical information from President Trump, of all people, or his team, like Stephen Miller.
Yeah. Here's the thing is wealthy people are going to have no trouble getting these vaccines. I mean, when they're mandated by the federal government, that also comes with certain financial, insurance companies have to cover these things. If they're no longer mandated and now it's like optional things, now insurance companies say, well, the federal government says these aren't necessary.
I think a lot of insurance companies are going to continue to cover them because their medical directors are going to say, no, they need to be covered. So hopefully that doesn't change. We'll see.
And as medical services dry up more and more because a lot of people, Jen, get MMR. When I was a kid, I got my MMR vaccine at school. A lot of people, they show up at school, all the kids line up, boom, 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 boom. And there, you're taking care of measles, mumps, and rubella, German measles. So what the... I keep asking this. It feels like every episode, what are we doing? And, but no, I mean, to have a message, but shouldn't that be a given? And I feel like a lot of these candidates that says, I will fight Trump. I know how to fight. I've been in the trenches. Vote for me. I'm electable. A lot of them are incumbents or have been in the positions where they could fight Trump, and their fight has been meager at best.
Yeah, they send letters,
Or they vote with him.
Protest letters, or they vote, and they just did. The Senate just voted on their continuing resolution to fund the government through December 11th. They could have taken a stand on some of those topics and delayed the vote or held out to get something else that they may want to help families in this country. They did not, so they caved.
Yeah. Well, and I was also thinking, I mean, here in Minnesota and also in Michigan with Haley Stevens and Angie Craig, they both voted for the Lake and Riley Act. That the very first bill of the Trump administration, they voted for it. And it's how is that fighting Trump to vote for the bill that allowed Operation Metro Surge in Minneapolis?
Yeah, and there's still bad things in this CR. I mean, there's still funding things that most Democrats won't want to fund, like a war in Iran and Israel, etc.
Yeah, this
goes
by
to the
way,
House next. But
speaking of the war, just briefly, and Thursday we're going to have another chat with JP Gresh, which I'm very excited about, because he's our military expert, and we're going to be. Last time we talked to him, it was all about Ukraine and Russia. This time we're going to be talking mostly about Iran and the Middle East. Although Ukraine has come up in that now, so I mean we'll talk about how these things are starting to overlap in worrying ways. But yeah, Trump's new position seems to be just kind of like wait it out.
Oh, he wants to get out of this, and his only condition is he wants the strait to be open. Well, Iran is never going to do that, ever. So he has really no way out, which ends in having an open Strait of Hormuz. So this is really bad.
No way out.
He wants to walk away, but he can't. Yeah, he can't.
So I think, remember, and I forgot where I saw someone talking about this, so I'm not going to claim this is my idea, but Compare it to Afghanistan. Trump wanted to get out of Afghanistan. He talked about getting out of Afghanistan his entire first term, but he's too much of a chicken to do it. He was worried about the political blowback because any getting out of Afghanistan was going to be messy. So he just puttered around and left it as the status quo. Now, that's easier to do because Afghanistan didn't have a chokehold on the world's oil supply. This is very different. What he's hoping is he can do the same damn thing and just leave the messy business of actually extracting the United States from this thing to the next president, whether that's J.D. Vance in the worst case scenario or a Democrat, hopefully a good one. But the point is like, because remember, Biden came in and one of the first things he did was get the hell out of Afghanistan. Thank goodness. And it was a bit messy. Unfortunately, people lost their lives, which is very messy. But there was almost no way it was going to be smooth and clean and stuff. But it's what Americans had wanted for a decade, was get the hell out. And Joe Biden, at least you could say he had the guts to do it. He did it. And then Republicans, because they didn't have the guts to do it, just, came in and attacked, which is what they don't have the, I genuinely believe Republicans don't have the courage to really do things that people actually want done. They're happy to do things nobody wants because...
Well, nobody wants the war in Iran. It's not popular. It's Trump and Republicans' war.
And they're happy to do it.
He was just, Trump was just in Nevada. He was supposed to be on message and talking about the no tax on tips and the economy. And he went off teleprompter, off script, and he started talking about the negotiations with Iran and how if something doesn't happen, they don't get their way, they're going to just bomb them, massive bombs. Like he said, like World War II, like you've never seen before. This is Trump saying this. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And he's saying, people will die, but that's the cost of it. That's the price. I'm like, holy shit.
And then when people did die, they tried to say, oh no, that wasn't part of the war. So they took their names off the rolls of war.
Nobody wants World War II. People, nobody wants that. And he's out there like promoting that's what's going to happen. I mean, so I don't know if he doesn't understand what's he's saying or what this means or that it's not popular, but he says something and then, his team will have to walk back some stuff. And then he flips on it the next day and it's just this whole flip flop. And so it's really disrupting people's lives and the economy, and people in other countries don't know what's going on because they don't have a plan. And there's just so much uncertainty. And I've never, as an economist, I've never done this before, but I will say that all of the economic problems in our country and many in other countries because of our behavior, Trump's behavior, we can blame a lot of it on President Trump and his administration. The economic issues we're seeing today are being caused by the President of the United States.
Yeah, it's all self-inflicted.
I have never blamed any economic issues on a president before, but I think for sure they are Trump's problems. He's causing these problems.
Yeah. It's all the problems that we're dealing with are so unbelievably self-inflicted. It's just shocking. It's really hard to fathom. I mean, he did all this to himself.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's doing these press conferences about vaccines or he's falling asleep. Now there's a new thing, Jen. I don't know if you saw this, but there was some very young woman standing right behind him during this whole thing. And when RFK Jr. was speaking about autism and vaccines and blah, blah, RFK Jr. is completely out to lunch. He's a nut. But anyway, so Trump kept falling asleep. You can see him just doze off to the right. And there's this girl behind him who every time he goes like this, she moves her hand up her stomach like this and taps, and he immediately bumps up.
He's watching her?
So he'll go like this. She moves her finger. No, she's behind him. So people are wondering if she's touching some sort of buzzer that's like reminding him to stay awake. That's the conspiracy theory. I love it, and we're gonna go with it until proven otherwise.
Okay. Well, I just try not to watch those press conferences. But
well, Okay, well, someone's got to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well,
no,
his approval is at 33%. So
it's incredible. It's incredible.
bad. Going
But I
into
think
a
it's really
midterm.
it's really fascinating just seeing how and this is something somebody has to keep an eye on Fox News from time to time. Fortunately, there's a lot of good journalists that do it, and I watch Fox News basically. So I see a lot. And sometimes I'll just go on YouTube and find Fox News hits and watch entire things because you got to know what the enemy's talking about. And this is in relation to today's primaries, but all of these primaries. The people on Fox News, the politicos, they're bringing on, Republican strategists, and they're also bringing on Democratic strategists that represent the corporate right wing of the party. And all of these people universally are saying, oh, this is going to doom Democrats, this turn towards DSA and all these kind of things. Now, keep in mind, this is Fox News giving Democrats advice. And then another big one that kind of went a bit viral just because he was yelling and screaming on his show, but Joe Scarborough, Morning Joe. Now, a lot of people might not remember, Joe Scarborough came into Congress in that Newt Gingrich Contract with America year. This was like Tea Party 1.0, or Tea Party, the beta edition. He was a Republican that was elected during this in 1994. He was the furthest right of the Republican Party back then that got elected. And now he's on MS Now. I keep wanting to say MSNBC. They've rebranded for whatever reason. But, NBC got rid of MSNBC. So they're MS, whatever, doesn't matter. But the point is he is like, you can see the spit coming out of his mouth. He is furious that the Democrats are allowing these candidates to win. Take it from me, a right-wing conservative Republican, at least back in 1994, you could say that about me. Now he makes other Republicans look even more crazy, but he's still a Republican, frankly, saying, heed my advice, Democrats.
Well, he's running. He was running in a conservative district, so it always depends on the district, Sam. You can't. We just can't make these blanket statements that
Joe Scarborough.
I mean, I'm just saying that he,
he's a Republican.
A Peggy Flanagan can win in Minnesota, even if she was in the DSA potentially. Could she win in another
my
state?
Point. My point is that Democrats need not take advice from a Joe Scarborough. Democrats should not be taking advice from former Republicans, current Republicans.
I don't think they are
offering the advice.
I don't hear people taking their advice. I think there are establishment Democrats who are also concerned about electing in a primary really progressive candidates. But like I said, if it fits the district, then we shouldn't be so concerned. It really has to. The candidates have to fit a district potentially. But what's into it, we should be watching is that primary in the 2nd Congressional District in Minnesota, because you have 3 Dems that are all very different, very progressive, moderate, more conservative. Right. And that's Angie Craig's district, and that is a moderate, they said, district. But if the more progressive candidate wins, that tells you something.
Well, my point in bringing that up, Jen, was not, let's look district by district and be really granular about this. My point is rather, it should concern Democratic strategists who find themselves parroting these lines that this is what every Fox News host and all of their guests are saying. If you're lining up with Fox News on all this stuff as a Democrat, you need to take a step back, or Joe Scarborough for that matter. You need to take a step back and actually do an analysis of what you're talking about and where you are. Because it's the voters picking these candidates. So they're scolding the voters. Joe Scarborough was spitting fire, like it's spittle coming out of his mouth, attacking the people voting for Francesca Hong. He was really going after Francesca Hong, frankly. That was his main vector of ire. which is not, it's
He
a
probably
state, not
hasn't
a
even
district.
heard her speak or anything. Probably knows very little about her, actually.
I agree with you, because they've been saying, these people have been saying the same thing for their entire, career as political talking heads. They don't
And it's not just
change.
him. I mean, it's like Fetterman, right? The senator is also
Yes.
saying very similar thing, repeating
Well, and
these
he's on Fox
Republican
News all the
messages.
time. He's constantly on Fox News. That's why they have him on, because he's a Democrat who will reliably say the things they want him to say.
I think that these Democrats need to remember what team they're on. And if they truly want to win, let's help the rest of the team out,
Well,
Let's
but
not
they're
go
invested in tearing down these candidates on the left who, when they win, they have a decision to make. And that decision is keep fighting them or join them. And it surprised me, Jen. I must say that at least initially, the jury is still out on what the rest of the campaign will be. But in Michigan, everybody lined up behind Abdul El-Sayed.
And even former President Obama reached out the day after they had a conversation. Even Chuck
Schumer, which
they
is
know
blowing
they
my
have
mind.
to win. They have to win the seat. They have to unify. I'm going to make a prediction. Maybe I shouldn't, but
let's do
my
it.
prediction is that the Democrats are going to be more together, solidify, come together, be more in unison than the Republicans going into the presidential 2028. That's my prediction. Is that
going into 2028?
Yeah, that they are going to be more together, and the Republicans are going to be the ones that are more divided, more fractured. I
think it's going to be a brutal primary for the Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
But you think after the primary, it will be more unified than Republicans?
Yes. And we'll see. Okay. Let's see that this happens going into the general after these primaries, if they are going to be able to come together. And Michigan's a good test case. Can Abdul win in the midterm? Did the party unify, or did they continue attacking each other? Because even in Minnesota, I mean, Angie Craig and Peggy Flanagan, their campaigns have been going after each other. So we'll see if they can repair any of that damage that's happening.
I don't think it's anywhere near. The vitriol has not risen to the level that it did between Abdul El-Sayed and Haley Stevens, largely because there was, Angie Craig is getting $20 million in independent expenditures, and Stevens got $60 million. So that's part of why this race in Minnesota is a little less vitriolic, as it were, because there's just less money to be, but it's still a huge amount of money. I think it's still the most money ever spent on a primary in the state of Minnesota. If I believe that's correct. Peggy Flanagan certainly has said it on the stump that it is the most expensive primary in the history of the state. So assuming she's correct, then it is. And this is not good. I mean, you and I have talked plenty about
we need to get the money out of politics. People are so sick of seeing these same streaming ads over and over and over. Like I said, I've been seeing Tom Tiffany, who's running another state. I've seen his ads over and over. Now I was just talking to another neighbor who was at his cabin in South Dakota, and he's seen a ton of Angie Craig ads. Western South Dakota. So if they're spending money, they're not doing a very good job of geocoding their streaming ads.
Yeah. I'm going to read that book I keep mentioning, the Cory Doctorow book, Enshittification, because he talks about how these companies sell the fact that you can super target your ads, and then they on purpose make the software so bad that it doesn't do it the way you paid for, so you have to give them even more money.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
They're doing that on purpose. They're making their product worse on purpose because there's no competition. And we need to. That's something that's actually the beat that Al Franken was on net neutrality and that kind of stuff. But we need more. Another reason we need younger politicians is because we need people who understand these issues about the enshittification of the digital world and our digital lives, and how we need to democratize the web once again. We need to get it back to the way it used to be, just in a more user-friendly form.
And AI guidelines. I mean, regulation. I think there are a lot of reasons why it would be good to have younger people who have been much more exposed to AI.
Yeah. I still maintain that it's going to financially blow up before it can do the kind of damage people are saying it's going to do. But yes, I mean,
No,
if
they
it
want another
continues,
$1 trillion. They're asking
course
private
they do.
equity for another $1 trillion
Of
for
course they do, because it's
AI.
all a loss. But here's, what the real danger is. And Ed Zitron just had a new. I saw the headline. I haven't been able to have time to read the article today, but basically, all of the last few years, pretty much, because all these tech companies want to be considered growth stock rather than matured stock. So for anyone who's not sure what the distinction is, growth stocks are companies that are younger, newer, fresher. They've got big ideas and they need investment to help them launch into whatever they're going into. Mature stocks are companies that basically they've arrived. They make an enormous amount of money, but they're not growing as a company. So those are what you may have heard people talk about. Blue chip stocks, those are mature stocks. They're basically set
like
up.
Apple.
The Apple, well, actually,
No,
Apple
IBM.
wants to be in pretty much the entire tech stock world. None of these companies want to be considered mature stocks. They all want to be considered growth stocks. So what Microsoft and what Google and what Amazon and some of these other companies have done, Meta, is, even though they, in their fields, they have completely taken over, there is no more growing they could possibly do. So what have they done? They've based their entire future as a growth stock on AI. They're so heavily invested in all these data centers. They're the ones that own the data, not OpenAI, not Claude, Anthropic, these companies. It's Microsoft, it's Google, it's Meta. They're building this infrastructure with money that they kind of have, but it's so much money. And they're saying, look, we're actually a growth industry. We're getting into this AI thing in a big way. These AI companies wouldn't exist without us. And so now you have OpenAI, you have Anthropic, that still haven't figured out how to monetize what they've got.
And now they're competing with China's AI that's free, that's open source and free. And I think OpenAI just went along with being open source free just to compete with China. So it's kind of scary, but what it's going to affect everyone. It is going to affect everyone.
Yes, because when this bubble bursts, and my God, it will burst, is going to have massive ramifications for what should be considered mature stocks.
It's 35% of the stocks. And if you have a retirement all in stocks, we're in big trouble. Yes.
Microsoft collapsing, Google collapsing.
Yeah.
I mean, this is major, major stuff. And AI is just never going to deliver on the promises of these people. Because what are they doing? They're promising bosses at companies that AI is going to replace all their workers, not help their workers. No.
Companies stopped buying tokens. I mean, they've stopped investing. They were running out of money.
Because finally, customers who are also getting scammed, by the way, those bosses that are buying this BS, they're getting scammed just as much as the workers those bosses want to fire. So everyone's getting scammed by the Microsofts and Metas, and also by the AIs, the Open AIs and the Anthropics and the other companies in that space. But those two companies right there have most of the bandwidth.
Another thing to blame our president on is that we are not able to compete with China, not on AI, but on robotics and the future, of manufacturing, which is heavily robotics.
Well,
and
Jen, I mean,
we'll
we
replace
have
labor,
far more than just Donald Trump to blame for losing out in competition to China. I mean, it's been decades of neoliberalizing and allowing China
especially now because he's ended funding for our institutions that do this, our one research and development, and we're doing fewer clinical trials, so we're going to be way behind on medical device innovation, drug discovery, using AI. I mean, we're like moving backwards. The clean energy groups, organizations, companies have put in money into campaigns against Republicans that were against clean energy. And they won some of these primaries. So they're they're concerned about being behind China on alternative energy. I mean, there's almost all only electric vehicles in China. So a lot of the noise pollution and air pollution is gone.
China has a command economy where they discipline their massive, gigantic companies. And we let our massive, gigantic companies roll all over us.
So we're going to be behind on the clean energy, and we're going to be more reliant on fossil fuels.
I would prefer if we stop looking at it as just pure competition, pure framing everything as like some sort of zero-sum game or like negative. It's pejorative. It's like what are they doing? We have to learn from what China is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Stop looking at them as just an enemy. Or even if you think of them as the enemy, what did Sun Tzu, speaking of China, what did he say? You got to know your enemy better than you know yourself, basically. So I don't think it's helpful or fruitful to think of the second largest nation by population as an enemy. I don't think that's useful or helpful at all. But yeah, what are they doing? Because they're kicking our butts in all kinds of ways. They have high-speed trains that go everywhere.
Yep.
They have these gigantic cities that seem to work and function just fine. I mean, I was talking to somebody who'd done a university professor who'd gone to China to do some sort of thing there, teaching seminar thing in China. And he was in Shanghai. And he said, we got on a train. And it was a fast train. And we were on it for 45 minutes in Shanghai. And it was still tall buildings, as though we were in a downtown for the entire 45 minutes. I mean, these are huge, vast expanses of people in all these buildings. Like they live in it's just 26 million people just in Shanghai. There's cities that Americans have never heard of that are 20 million plus in terms of population. And China's managing all this in ways where their industry is taking off, their manufacturing is taking off, their public services are taking off, and we're behind on everything. And that's not just because of Trump. I mean, Trump exacerbates any fall off we have, but this is decades in the making of us privatizing everything.
We don't want to adopt every policy in China. Come on. I want my freedom.
Well, no, but we need to. I'm not saying
no, but
that.
You're saying that the types of, government regulation of growth in industry.
They don't allow any of their services to people be privatized. We allow all of our services to be privatized.
Almost all, not all.
Almost all, but the Republicans want all of it privatized, even schools, everything. And China, if you even talk like that, you get sent to the gulag. Okay, being sent to the gulag is bad. We don't want that. So we'll leave that to China. They can do that. We don't want that. But damn. It's like
there's things we can learn. And I think this is why, going back to our original discussion, we want young people who maybe have been to China, have been traveled abroad, right? To bring these ideas back to the US.
People who don't have the Cold War infection.
Yeah.
Like we have to look at the rest of the world as an enemy.
Right.
We don't need that anymore because look what it's getting us. It's just endless war.
Sam, do we have a good news story to end on?
The good news is today is primary day and I'm expecting good results.
You're excited, which we'll talk about tomorrow because we don't have a guest. Is that correct,
That's
Sam?
Right. That's what we're going to be talking about.
We will talk all
tomorrow.
about the primary results and what they mean, what we can expect in the general.
Yeah, and there's a few other news items to get to as well, and we'll do all that and more tomorrow and in future days. Please stick around for my excellent conversation with Joel Sipress. We're going to be having him on again for sure. Fantastic guy and excellent interview, if I may say so myself. But that is all for now. On behalf of Jen Schultz, I'm Sam Martin, and this has been Our Dissent. Joining me now is Joel Sipress, professor of history at the University of Wisconsin-Superior. He's served on the Duluth, Minnesota City Council for 2 terms between 2014 and 2021, and is now the elected chair of the DFL party for the 8th Senate District in Minnesota, which encompasses nearly all of the city of Duluth. Joel is also a founding member of the Twin Ports Democratic Socialists of America. Thanks so much, Joel, for coming on today.
Happy to be here.
So just to kind of set up our conversation, today is a big primary day here in the upper Midwest. Minnesota and Wisconsin voters go to the polls, and there are major elections for the future of the Democratic Party in both states. And so there's a lot of interest in what is the Democratic Socialists of America? What is the DSA? What does it mean? And now that to a lot of viewers, they seem to be not necessarily taking over the Democratic Party, but building a significant base within the party. There's a lot of people who are interested, excited, and also freaking out and scared and all that kind of stuff. It's all over the spectrum. So I don't want to approach everything from the standpoint of electoralism, but it's a big topic right now since we are in the middle of the primaries. So let's start by kind of getting a little background into what the DSA is. I mean, it's a organization, I imagine, that comes out of the left from the early 1900s when we had Eugene V. Debs running for president when he was in prison for labor organizing. And there's a long tradition there.
It's actually a direct lineal descendant of the old Socialist Party that kind of had its heyday in the early 20th century, associated with people like Eugene Debs in the teens or Norman Thomas in the 1930s. So DSA is literally descended from the old Socialist Party.
So when would you say the modern version of the DSA kind of, where does it have its, well, we know where it has its roots, but where does it have kind of its flowering, its beginning?
Well, the interesting thing is DSA as an independent organization, I want to stress it's not a political party. It's an advocacy and activist organization. Out of the final wreckage of the Socialist Party in the 1970s, a group of people created something at that time called DSOC, which was the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee. And it was people who were, had ties to the old left going back to the 30s. The most prominent person involved with this was a guy named Michael Harrington, who is known by many people as the author of a book called The Other America that was written in the 1960s that helped inspire the war on poverty in the 1960s and a lot of LBJ's Great Society programs. Mm-hmm. And Harrington and those who were like allied with him were deeply committed to a democratic vision of socialism, but believed that the third party approach of the old Socialist Party was a dead end. And so they created what was then known as DSOC in the 1970s to basically advocate for socialist-oriented policies. And tactically and strategically, they decided in terms of their electoral work, they would operate within the Democratic Party. Okay. That organization merged with a group called the New America Movement in the early 1980s, which is an organization that had emerged out of the New Left and the protest movements in the 1960s. And when those two organizations merged in the 1980s, that was the birth of DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. And for a number of decades, it was a relatively small group. Its membership was typically somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 members nationwide. In some ways, kind of like, holding the torch, keeping the torch going for this vision of a democratic socialism. And then in some ways, the modern DSA was born in the wake of the Sanders presidential campaign of 2016 and the election of Donald Trump in 2016, because the Sanders campaign gave new visibility to the idea of democratic socialism. And beginning with that campaign in the years that followed, there was like a massive influx of people into DSA, so that today it has about 120,000 members, which makes it the largest, in terms of membership, largest socialist organization in the United States since the 1930s.
So, well, obviously, Sanders is the most high-profile member of this movement. I mean, I guess you could argue Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is kind of picking up that torch, but...
And to be clear, Sanders is not actually a DSA member.
That's right. That's right. But, he's perfectly fine with the media putting the word socialism on him. He's
Absolutely. He embraces that.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, Joel, because I find I have two different kinds of conversations with people, and it really comes down to how old they are. There are people who, the moment they hear the word socialism or communism, they tighten up and get nervous. They tend to be people, I would say, who were maybe in high school at about the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Right.
That's kind of the age cohort that gets nervous when they hear these words. But so that would be people maybe 50 and older, but everyone under 50 who doesn't have this kind of strong memory. I was pretty young when the Berlin Wall fell. I don't really remember it. It didn't mean much to me. And those words don't have nearly as much salience, if any real salience, to people under age 50. And so it seems like it took until the last 10 years or so for the word socialism or democratic socialism. And all of these things have different definitions, and people within these movements argue endlessly over definitions and how they should define themselves and those kind of things, which is, anyone who knows anything about the history of the left in the United States or anywhere else in the world knows that it's a lot of people arguing about definitions. But at the end of the day, there's what politicians say they want their policies to be, the platform. And then there's all of the academic arguments that people have. And it seems like Bernie Sanders' campaign cut right through that and hit people, again, currently younger than 50, 10 years ago, people younger than 40, with a message that they'd never heard a mainstream politician say in their entire lives before.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's right. And I'll say a couple of things about DSA to just kind of like expand on the observation just made. And one which is very important is that DSA from its founding was intended to be what I would call a big tent organization. It explicitly doesn't have a party line. If you know your history of the left, it's a history of a lot of infighting and arguments over who has the correct line. And from the beginning, it was an organization that took democracy very, very seriously. The reason that the founders of DSA, or DSOC, its predecessor, used the term democratic socialism was precisely to distinguish their vision from, Soviet-style communism or authoritarian socialism. The founders of DSA were on what back in those days would have been called the anti-communist left, the part of the left that was deeply, deeply opposed to the Soviet model. And so that's why they called it democratic socialism. But they also took that seriously in terms of the internal culture of the organization. I think one of the reasons it's grown so quickly is because it aspires to be a home for everyone who identifies as a socialist and believes in democracy. And so there is no party line. There is no one way of thinking, but it's where people who share a set of values come together and find common ground and work together. And in terms of the generational part of it, I think you're right. Part of it is that young people don't have the negative associations that came from the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the other thing, too, is that younger people have been deeply, deeply let down by American capitalism. Because things are so much harder for young people than they were, say, for my generation, that I think that politicians or an organization that basically says, you know what? There are alternatives to thinking that, private corporate ownership of everything is the solution to all our problems, I think are getting a hearing among younger people because that system has let them down.
Right. Well, let's talk about that system. And, because, when the wall came down and the Soviet Union essentially lost the Cold War, if it was possible to lose, thinkers, I guess you would call them, in the neoliberal sphere, who made up the majority of traditional Democrats and Republicans at the time. I mean, and I've talked with Jen endlessly about the fact that the Clinton administration had Robert Rubin and Larry Summers and these just odious right-wing, revanchist economists who just wanted to punish workers, a la Ronald Reagan. that was very much a part of the mainstream Democratic Party at the time, or at least of the politicians. And, unbeknownst to me at the time, because I was just, I was in high school, what did I know about this stuff? But there was a guy telling us, Francis Fukuyama, very famous neoliberal scholar, telling us that history had come to an end. Liberal democracy, meaning neoliberal democracy, in terms of capitalism, has won. It is dominant throughout the world, and there is no, and we cannot conceive of any better system of organizing ourselves as a populace than capitalist liberal democracy. And then ever since then, both parties, Democrats and Republicans, have operated in that, just like both parties operated in the world that was the New Deal America after FDR. Now both parties operated in Ronald Reagan's America of we've won. Hallelujah.
And then I would add, it wasn't just that capitalism was declared triumphant. It was that a particularly unrestrained version of capitalism was declared triumphant. What you referred to as neoliberal capitalism, which is, an approach to capitalism that just says the free market, the market will solve everything. So you're right. At the very time that the Soviet system failed and collapsed, this particularly unrestrained version of capitalism was declared triumphant. And it's that particularly unrestrained version that I think let down, younger generations of people in this country.
Right. And it had its apotheosis on the Democratic Party side with the Clinton administration. You could argue that it was just carried over into the Obama administration, because Obama he had Larry Summers in his cabinet, but he also had the acolytes of the Robert Rubins and all of those people in his cabinet as well. So there was this through line, and it seemed to be this uninterrupted, because Bush's economic advisors acted in very much the same way that Clinton's did and then Obama's did later. And obviously Trump, just pressed a hyperdrive on all those things. And oddly, for a presidency that's viewed now fairly negatively by a lot of people, actually, Joe Biden's presidency was the first to actually put a break on that. And I would, because of the people he had in his cabinet, he had completely different economic views in his cabinet from previous administrations. In fact, he had Larry Summers as an advisor initially for his transition and then fired him.
That's right.
So it seems like that's not because that's at the moral core of Joe Biden. It didn't seem that way. It seemed like that was because of the movement that built up Bernie Sanders, and even to an extent Elizabeth Warren, which is different. She's further from DSA, obviously.
And I would add one thing to that in terms of, Biden's effort at a course correction, which obviously failed on the political side. And I think this is also a key to understanding like the rise of MAGA and Trump. And this isn't limited to the United States, is that, for the Democratic Party has always been the party, or at least in modern times, that runs on a platform of doing things for people. Right? Under FDR, we're going to ensure you have your collective bargaining rights. We're going to ensure that you have a dignified retirement. Under Johnson, we're going to make sure that, again, that the elderly have access to health care. OSHA, we're going to make sure that you have a safe workplace. So the Democratic Party was traditionally the party that mobilized voters by basically saying, we will do stuff for you. And once you embrace this neoliberal or unrestrained version of capitalism, one of the pillars of that is we don't look to the state, we don't look to the government to do things for us. So I think politically, one of the things that Biden understood was if you're going to rebuild the Democratic Party, you have to actually, embrace an approach to politics that says the government is actually something that meets the needs that the private market can't meet.
Right.
And that's what he was trying to do. I think he was trying to reorient the Democratic Party back to a more traditional view that said, yes, the private capitalist economy generates wealth, but the market can't do everything. And what the market can't do, the government, the state will. And for Biden, I think part of that was then if we can demonstrate that the state can fill in those gaps, that are left by the private market, that will, re-energize support for the Democratic Party. And I think in a sense, the difference between him and an organization like DSA is, regardless of where you are in the DSA spectrum, which is fairly broad, the DSA critique of capitalism is that the gaps that are left by the private market, the gaps that are left by private capitalism, the gaps that are left by private investment, from the DSA perspective, are much bigger and much broader than what somebody like Joe Biden would have said.
Right. Well, to a certain extent, I would argue that Joe Biden was an effective room reader in a certain sense.
Correct.
That may not have been his political agenda, but he could read the room and see that he needed to course correct from where Obama had been economically.
Exactly. Yep.
And I would say one of the best room readers in the country right now, oddly, is the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, who just seems to, every time Zoran Mamdani makes a move that is extremely popular in her state, she's like, oh, okay, I'm supporting that too. And so there is that kind of old style read the room thing going on still.
And frankly, the best room reader in American history was probably Franklin Roosevelt. Because when Franklin Roosevelt came into office, he wasn't what today we would call a New Deal Democrat. He became a New Deal Democrat in response to the various kinds of things that you're describing. He could read the room of where the country was at and what the country needed, and he sort of became a New Deal Democrat.
Well, and very much like Joe Biden 100 years later, or almost, he appointed some absolutely incredible people into his cabinet. And he had, a very, very, very left-leaning wife whose influence on him was
that's also true.
Was pretty profound. But
and then the other difference, of course, is that Biden couldn't pull it off politically. Biden just could not pull it off politically, in part just due to his declining communication skills.
In part due to that, but also, I think Biden is going to be remembered far more for the foreign policy snafus, for his support for Israel and all that kind of stuff. Then,
well, yes, absolutely. Where he actually could not read the room.
No. Well, it seems like on economic issues, he did not have ideological commitments. He was willing to read the room. Whereas when it came to his support for Israel, it was ideological.
Agreed.
And and to a certain extent, looking back on presidencies, at least Democratic presidencies, because waste time talking about the Republican ones, but Obama seemed, for instance, ideologically committed to that kind of third way bipartisanship. I mean, people don't remember this, Joel, but Obama had made a deal with John Boehner and the Republicans to cut Social Security and Medicare before the right-wing Republicans blew up the deal.
I do remember that. I remember,
and that would have been at the feet of a Democratic president cutting Social Security and Medicare. Yep. So it seems that DSA has been in the wings, had been waiting for some sort of like broad-based movement to inspire a lot of people to join. And there were moments along the way where that kind of happened. Like going back to the 80s, there was, the reaction to Reagan and Thatcher, but also the reaction to the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. And then if we fast forward, then there was the reaction to the Iraq War. And then after that, there was the 2008 crash and Occupy Wall Street. I assume that was a huge spike for DSA membership. Is that a fair assumption?
It was not.
It was not.
It was not. Because at that time, DSA had an aging membership.
Okay.
That may have been sympathetic to the Occupy Wall Street, but didn't really have any organic connection to it. I mean, honestly, what happened was, as I said, literally this older generation of DSA kept the torch, the flame alive for this idea of democratic socialism. Was not very effective at recruiting new people or bringing younger people in. And then literally what happened was that younger people who got activated and energized by the Bernie campaign in 2016 were looking for a home, and they searched for a home, and they found this thing called DSA, and they just joined it. And almost overnight, they outnumbered the veterans who'd been keeping it alive for decades. In fact, I was just looking at some of this earlier today. It wasn't just that the membership of the organization spiked in the wake of the 2016 Bernie campaign. The average age spiked. In 2015, the average age of a DSA member was in the 60s.
Okay.
And by 2017, 2018, the average age of a DSA member was in the low 30s.
Wow. And
I actually was a delegate to the National Convention of DSA in 2017, which is sometimes referred to as the first convention of the new DSA.
Okay.
And it was really interesting. The convention was like this relatively small group of like old timers, and then all these people under 30 who had just discovered they were socialists.
Wow. And it's not a matter of anyone having been scared of the term before. It's just not being aware that this organization was available for them, or just they needed the Bernie campaign to get them where they went, I guess.
Yeah. And if you think about it, the difference was, Occupy Wall Street was against the 1%. But Occupy Wall Street didn't have a vision of what to do other than we don't want the 1% ruling over us anymore. And I think, DSA was available as an organization, and Bernie Sanders gave it a name. Bernie Sanders mobilized all these people. And I think the real power of Bernie's campaign, especially in 2016, was for the first time in a very long time, he actually described what an alternative might look like. And he gave it a name. And it's the name that he had been using for it since, he was young himself, which was democratic socialism. And so having been energized by that campaign and having come to an awareness that, there is an alternative to unrestrained neoliberal capitalism, and it has a name, and it's called democratic socialism, people began searching for a home, to act on what Bernie had inspired them to fight for, and they flooded into DSA. And so a group of people flooded in right after the 2016 campaign, and the election of Trump also was a spur for membership growth. The election of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to Congress in 2018 led to another burst in membership. And then the second Trump election in 2024 led to another burst in growth because, again, a lot of people felt completely let down by the Democratic Party establishment and were open to looking for some alternative, some other way to resist what Trump represented. And then when Mamdani was elected mayor of New York City, that was another wave. So ever since 2016, every time something happens that basically sends a message to people that we need something different than what we've been doing, that then has sparked significant growth in membership for DSA.
Right. Well, and now, thanks, Joel. You've brought us up to now, and it seems like DSA. I mean, you mentioned Zoran Mamdani, but well, first, let's go back to AOC, because to think about what now a lot of people on the left take for granted are the wins that have been achieved since 2016.
Yep.
I mean, people take AOC for granted now. I mean, she gets attacked from the left quite frequently because she's trying to do that, kind of practical politicking that's necessary in order to build a coalition of other legislators in Washington, D.C. I'm quite sympathetic to the fact that she's trying various things out and like trying to navigate these waters where there's a very, it will never not be the case that there's a lot of infighting among the left. It just will never not be.
And I will say, as a former elected official, there will always be a healthy, necessary tension between left elected officials and kind of the grassroots left, for exactly the reason that you stated, which is that if you want to get anything done as an elected official, you need to build working relationships with people who may be more moderate than you. And that's the only way you can get things done. But you then run the risk of going too far and losing touch with the movement and the values got you elected in the first place, which is where the grassroots left will then try to
course correct you. Yeah.
course correct you. And so I think that will always be a natural tension. There were times when I was on the Duluth City Council, where there were a couple people, and actually there were DSAers who once in a while would just pull me aside and say, we really need you on this. This is one where we just need you to really be strong for us. And it was important to have people who weren't in office to be able to remind me of that at times. So I think that tension between left elected officials and the grassroots left will always be there. And it's healthy and necessary.
If only more elected officials had that kind of equanimity to activists, because activists should be in, the way I think about it, the moment someone is elected to public office, they're not your friend anymore. And they can't, it's like they're now in a job that has potentially life or death consequences for large numbers of people. I mean, they can't be your friend anymore. And certainly many people in the DSA have that attitude with respect to AOC, because she has indeed course corrected when she's tried to appease the moderates in order to smooth over the relationship. Sometimes, maybe she has gone a little too far. Certainly, in her opinion, she has gone a little too far sometimes, and she tacks back. But it's always this give and take. And while there is this kind of image of the Bernie bro, which is the huge Bernie Sanders fan who, in the minds of Hillary Clinton supporters, just sat at home and refused to vote for Hillary Clinton, which I think is descriptive of not that large of a section of the populace. But I mean, I'm sure they do
and in
exist.
fact, the research on the 2016 campaign shows that the numbers of Sanders voters in 2016 who sat out the 2016 election was relatively small.
Right. And I'm much more a fan of blaming politicians for their failures rather than voters for not voting for them. I
always say that as a former elected official and now chair of the local DFL party, I always say to people, don't blame the voters.
I totally agree with that.
If you don't like how the voters are voting and you're involved in politics, you need to examine what you're doing, not what the voters are doing.
I agree with that because, and you said it a little earlier when you were going over that recent history, is that when Trump won a second time, there were a lot of new interest in DSA because, of course, what did the Democratic Party do so wrong that they let this guy in for a second, crack at it? And that was a question, frankly, that the state DFL party chair, Kent Martin, who ran and successfully became the Democratic National Committee chair, he ran on answering that question. That was his main platform for running for that seat. That, and he could raise lots of money from, I'll quote him, good billionaires and not bad billionaires. That's a whole nother thing. I could go on all day about that. But he ran on this idea that his DNC would discover what went wrong in 2024, and then completely failed to do that. I mean, he didn't want to. He had some friend of his just do a report, and then the guy did.
And of course, the irony of that is that his main opponent for DNC chair was Ben Wickler of Wisconsin, who had actually successfully already done that work on the ground in Wisconsin and already had the answer.
Right. And now he just published a book, which I haven't yet read, which is, about reversing the problems that were present in that 2024 campaign. But the point is there were problems, and they're pretty obvious to a lot of people looking at it. But if you were to only get your news from, say, MSNBC, which is now MS Now, for whatever reason, if you're only getting your news from them and CNN and whatever, you would think it's because Kamala Harris wanted to do nothing but talk about, transgender conversion therapies or whatever, which was, of course, how Donald Trump framed her.
Correct.
And she didn't really, in fact, she studiously avoided ever mentioning transgender people in her campaign. She didn't talk about it. I mean, she ran away from the issue pretty much entirely. So it's very strange when people think of that campaign, they often bring up, oh, those ads that Trump played, she's for they, them. I think the read is wrong on that. I think what people were hearing was she's for the corporate elites and we're for you. I think that's more the message, because that's kind of been why. I mean, we have to discover. I have this book over my shoulder called Rural versus Urban, which is a fantastic book if you haven't had a chance to read it. But it's by a couple of scholars who are like, why did rural America, which once was like the heartland, if you will, for leftist politics, why is it now, deep red, rock red Republican? And they would say that it's this neoliberal shift. And it's the shift away from Democrats standing for things and fighting for people. Like you said, I mean, the Democratic Party was the party associated with doing things for people, whether it's FDR's New Deal or LBJ's Great Society. And of course, JFK had some successes before he was assassinated. But, and then since then, what? I mean, some people have good memories of Jimmy Carter's. Other people remember Jimmy Carter beginning the Democrats crushing unions. I mean, that was the kind of the beginning of anti-unionism within the Democratic Party.
Well, and then, some people have said there's a line of argument that says that kind of the neoliberal takeover of the Democratic Party began in 1976 when Jimmy Carter, we're going to get really obscure here, defeated Mo Udall in the Iowa caucuses.
Well, that's very obscure.
Yeah.
Because people think about the attempt to recruit Senator Ted Kennedy to run against Carter.
Well, that's precisely why Kennedy was recruited to run against Carter. He was recruited to run against Carter because I would say the remnants of the old New Deal coalition saw the Carter presidency as sort of undermining that. And, the Kennedy challenge to Carter in 1980 was an attempt to try to reinvigorate the old New Deal coalition and get it back in the dominant position in the Democratic Party.
But then voters decided, well, yeah, this guy's kind of anti-union, I guess, but there's a real anti-union guy running. And then, of course, Reagan gets elected. And so ever since then, it's kind of, for a lot of Americans, going to the ballot box has kind of been a choice between two unpleasant options. I mean, let's be honest. It's like, and this has been the case for a while. I mean, people, it's not equivalent.
My entire adult life.
Well, same here.
Yeah.
Until now.
But for me, literally, I was 16 years old when Ronald Reagan was elected. The first presidential election I voted in was 1984. And I literally remember in 1992, and I would have been what? I would have been 20. No, yeah, I would have been in my late 20s in 1992 when Clinton was elected. I remember election night, and I literally remember. And by the way, and this is what a lot of people don't remember. In 1992, when when Bill Clinton ran for president in 1992, he really ran a very populist-oriented campaign. He ran kind of as like the rebirth of Harry Truman, and he ran as like an old-fashioned New Deal Democrat, and he was going to undo Reaganism. He was going to undo the Reagan Revolution. That's how he ran.
Right.
And because actually I lived in North Carolina at the time and understood Southern politics, and actually my graduate field as a historian was the history of the South, I knew that that's not who Bill Clinton really was. And I remember thinking to myself, all my friends up north who are voting for Bill Clinton as they think he's going to undo the Reagan Revolution and bring back the old New Deal Democratic coalition, I'm thinking they're going to be so let down when they see what they get. And I literally remember election night in 1992 when my first thought when they declared that Clinton was the victor, I'm like, oh, thank goodness. The Reaganism is done. Reaganism is over. And then I watched Bill and Hillary and Al and Tipper come out for their big thing in Little Rock. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, and now we're stuck with these people. And it's exactly what you were saying. It was better than the alternative, but it wasn't really a real alternative, because all it really did, I think, all the Clinton years really did, all the Obama years really did, was to slow down the gradual unraveling of our country's social fabric. And it does make a difference whether it's unraveling slowly or quickly.
For sure.
And, and I voted for Clinton and I voted for Obama. And I had higher hopes for Obama, and then it didn't turn out the way I hoped it would.
Well, just to your point, he ran as this, like, bring back the left, hope and change.
Yeah.
And and everybody believed it. Now,
yeah.
like you,
and I
then
I don't regret those votes, because whether the social fabric unravels quickly or slowly matters in people's lives.
Yes.
But I think you are right that the first president since 1980 who actually took seriously the idea that things had to be done to begin, reversing this gradual unraveling of this country's social fabric was Biden. But for a lot of reasons, Biden couldn't pull it off politically.
Right.
And again, I
not
think
least of which his age. I mean, let's be frank.
Not least of which, in fact, mainly because of that. But I think this comes back to the original question of the rise of DSA, is that, DSA is really clearly was saying that, yes, the social fabric in this country has been unraveling for decades. And the reason for this is unrestrained capitalism. And it's not enough to try to slow the rate of unraveling. We need to, the healthcare system is crumbling before our eyes. The housing market is completely insane. And these things are only going to change if we have a fundamentally different approach to how we think about, everything from, the workplace to the healthcare system to housing. And we need to increasingly view these as social goods that we need to invest in collectively. And to me, that's the main message of DSA has been, you don't solve the housing market by hoping that Wall Street will finance affordable housing.
No.
You solve the housing crisis by having social investment in affordable housing. That, you don't solve the healthcare system by trying to patch up, a crumbling system whose main purpose is to extract wealth from human bodies. You solve the healthcare crisis by designing a healthcare system that actually pays to keep people healthy and help them when they're sick.
Right. All of these economic issues are choices we make as a public. I mean, all of these are choices. People, especially these economists that have been advising, top politicians on both sides of the aisle said, no, these are immutable laws of economics. I mean,
right.
Corporations are going to corporationists. They're just going to do what they do. And big business is going to big business. And, it's just going to, that's the way it is. Margaret Thatcher was famous for Tina, right? There is no alternative. This is simply the way it has to be. And Francis
Fukuyama, back to a point you made earlier, which was the message of Fukuyama.
Yep.
There is no alternative but unrestrained neoliberal capitalism.
Right. And now finally we have politicians telling us, you know what, there is a choice.
It doesn't have to be this way.
Right. We do have a choice.
And I do think actually that on some level, that's been the main appeal of DSA, particularly to younger people, is just the message that it doesn't have to be like this. And if you think about younger people and what they've grown up with, I mean, their memories, and for some, they don't even remember 9/11, but for the ones who are older, 9/11, the 2008 crash, the Iraq War, the election of Donald Trump, the pandemic, the disaster in our healthcare system, the disaster in our housing market, the failure to do anything meaningful about climate change. And it's a really kind of depressing generational experience. And
yes.
when DSA and DSA candidates come along and basically just say it doesn't have to be this way, to me, that's at the heart of kind of what we might call the new left. Just saying out loud, it doesn't have to be this way.
So let's talk about these candidates right now, and
Yep.
people who have been elected right now who are saying this. So obviously, AOC in some ways is the OG of this new wave, because Bernie Sanders isn't officially part of the DSA.
Right.
But there's lots of candidates running right now who are carrying these messages without the endorsement, or specifically asking not to have the endorsement. Like I think of Abdul El Sayed in Michigan. Like
Right, who, by the way, does not very clearly does not and has never identified as a democratic socialist.
Right. And that's an electoral strategy. That is not I don't think that has anything to do with his policies or his politics. I think that's entirely electoral strategy.
In his case, I think it's more than an electoral strategy, because he never has. I don't think you could find a time where he ever said, I'm a democratic socialist. One thing I would say is that the left in this country has always been broader than those who identify as socialists.
Of course.
I think he's very much in what we might call the old populist progressive tradition of the Midwest. And in many ways, he's a natural ally for DSA. But I think there's a reason he doesn't describe himself as a democratic socialist.
But regardless of how people describe them, of how he describes himself, or how anybody describes himself, I mean, the Republicans they don't care about these distinctions. And frankly, mainstream media doesn't really care about these.
Of course they don't. He gets lumped in. He's lumped in with all the rest of the insurgent left candidates, because he is an insurgent left candidate. Yes.
And even some of since we're based in Minnesota here, Joel, let's talk a little bit about the Minnesota Senate primary that's happening today. And I see your I voted sticker. I voted early.
I voted this morning.
I have my sticker somewhere. I was planning on voting on the day, but whatever. But anyway, so Peggy Flanagan is, I guess, the insurgent left candidate, but she's far from insurgent if you just think about what her current position is as the second highest elected official in the state, lieutenant governor, which in Minnesota, for anyone who's not familiar, the lieutenant governor in Minnesota is like an almost meaningless position in terms of what you actually
correct. Yeah,
do.
It's kind of like vice president of the United States.
Yeah, I think the one thing she has any remit over is the grounds of the state capitol, and she's actually led an initiative to make the state capitol safer. And from what Jen tells me, is she's done an excellent job in making the state capitol a safer place for people to go to work, especially in light of all the violence that's been happening in Minnesota, political violence against state legislators specifically. But here is Peggy Flanagan. She is not part of the DSA, and I would say she is more moderate than Abdul El Sayed in terms of just overall policy. And yet she's very like the parallels between her race against Angie Craig and Abdul's race against Haley Stevens you can't deny those parallels. I mean, there's a lot of corporate money.
And I think the Flanagan campaign and the dynamics of the Flanagan-Craig campaign are very revealing about the times we're living in. Because you're right. I mean, Peggy Flanagan, is very much what I would call in the mainstream of kind of liberal, progressive DFL politics, but very much rooted in the existing institutions. She does not have a history of being an insurgent or a boat rocker or identifying as being on the left. But she was always definitely, more identified with labor and more identified with issues like the minimum wage, and stuff like that. And in some ways, I would say, I think she's personally not that different from Obama. Because my take on Obama has always been that Obama's values leaned left and his temperament leaned cautious. Right? So I think, he went down the neoliberal path, not because his values, not because he was a true believer, but because He's by temperament a conciliator. Let's get everyone to the table. Let's not wage war against the power brokers. Let's work within the existing rules of the game to try to get something done. And that led him down this kind of neoliberal path, almost like by inertia. And I think in some ways, Peggy Flanagan is very, very much the same way. Her values clearly lean more to the left, but she's always been someone who is more comfortable operating within the system, operating within the established rules of Minnesota DFL politics.
But she's
and what happened?
Sorry.
Yeah, and what happened was, early on in the campaign, Angie Craig kind of sewed up a lot of those powerful institutional players in Minnesota. And if Peggy was going to run a competitive race against Angie Craig, kind of the insider institutional path was blocked. So if the insider institutional path was blocked, how do you have to run? You have to run as a grassroots insurgent. And so I think early on, she made a strategic decision to run that way. And I think because her values leaned left, she was comfortable doing that. But then she kind of caught fire among the grassroots because that's what the grassroots was looking for. I've never, I've been involved with the DFL for years. I've never seen rank and file DFLers as disgusted with the established party leadership, as disgusted with sort of the insider approach. And even people I know who I've known for years who I would say in the past on the issues, they lean left, but temperamentally, they're don't rock the boat. We can trust our elected officials. Almost all those people were for Peggy Flanagan because I think, again, largely because of what happened in 2024. People have lost confidence in the way politicians like Angie Craig operate. And Peggy Flanagan just happened to be in a position where she had to run in a way that she had to appeal to those people, and they rallied to her cause. And you end up with a campaign that surprisingly looks a lot like the Michigan Senate primary, even though you're right that Peggy Flanagan and Abdul El Sayed are very different people.
Yeah, and because of how she's run, I mean, it's going to have a major impact on, if she wins, how she's going to, do her business as a senator. I mean, she's staked
absolutely
out.
Because to win, she had to ally herself with Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders in that wing of the caucus in the U.S. Senate, because she had to base her campaign there because Angie Craig had kind of sewn up, the more establishment players. And if she wins this primary and is elected to the U.S. Senate, she's going to be an ally for the left in the U.S. Senate.
Right. And the main argument that Angie Craig is making is the same argument that Haley Stevens was making in Michigan, which is an electability argument, although Haley Stevens' campaign had a lot more racism directed at, Abdul El Sayed than the Minnesota race has against Peggy Flanagan for obvious reasons. But this electability argument, I'm so wholly unconvinced. I mean, obviously I'm unconvinced, but Joel, why should we be unconvinced that by the electability arguments from the center, from the moderate?
Okay. So this is where it gets really interesting. My politics are on the left. I'm a DSAer, but I'm not one of those people who say that you can't win as a moderate. It comes back to what we said earlier. To win as a Democrat, you have to run on a platform of fighting vigorously for what people need. You have to run that way. It's the only way you can run successfully as a Democrat, because the reason people vote for Democrats is the Democratic Party is the party that promises to do things for people. And I always say there's a way to run as a moderate in what might be more swing districts, and be very connected with your district and your constituency, and identify the things you can run on where you can say, I'm going to get these things done for you because these things really matter and will make your life better. There's a way to run that way as a moderate. And there's a way to run that way on the left. There's a way to run from the left where you're out of touch with the constituency you want to represent. And there's a way to run as a moderate where you're out of touch with the constituency you want to represent. But whether you're more moderate or if you're on the left, you have to run a campaign where you convince people to have confidence that you are going to actually represent their needs in a meaningful way. And the problem with the Angie Craig or Haley Stevens version of moderation is neither of them are really running on anything. They're both running on, I'm going to stand up to Donald Trump and vote for me because I'm the one who can win. There are members of Congress, like there's a guy, I forget, Pat Ryan. There's so many Ryans in politics. He represents a Hudson River Valley district. And I've seen interviews with him. I've looked at the way he ran. He's a self-described moderate, and yet he was running. You know how like Syed had his money out of politics, money in your pocket, Medicare for all. That's like the left version of how you run as a fighter for people's needs. And he was running by identifying things that really mattered in his district and running on them fiercely. So I think there are ways to run as a so-called moderate. But you've got to stand for something. You've got to convince people that you are going to go in there and fight like hell for things they need. Because as we've said, the social fabric in this country is unraveling. And if you can't convince people that you're going to do something about that, people aren't going to have time for you. And I think that's the fundamental flaw of like the Angie Craig or Haley Stevens version of moderation. It's the same old, everything is pretty much fine except for Trump. Well, if everything was really fine except for Trump, Trump would not have been elected 2 times.
Exactly. So now let's carry this argument over, because you live in Minnesota and you do your politics in Minnesota, but you work in Wisconsin. And today's election day in Wisconsin, and there is a massive, now we're talking about an actually DSA endorsed, self-described DSA
absolutely Francesca Hahn.
Yep, running for governor, who is, if the polls are to be believed, and let's be really skeptical about statewide polls because they haven't been very accurate, but she's way in the lead.
Yeah. And I don't think you need to rely on the polls. I think all the momentum, all the energy is with Francesca Hahn. And I think it's almost certain, although as a historian, I am reluctant to predict the future. I think it's almost certain she's going to be the Democratic nominee.
So here's where the mainstream media and certainly Republicans and the Angie Craig and Haley Stevens type, this is where where they hope that their argument about electability, they're trying to tear Francesca Hahn down, even though there's no chance of any of her opponents probably getting this nomination. She's going to be the Democratic nominee. Yep. And obviously it's up to her to do a lot of the work to unify.
That's right.
Whatever. So she has work to do once she wins this thing, assuming she does. But now here is where I would say people watching might be agreeing with a lot of the stuff we're saying so far, potentially. But now here's where, because Francesca Hahn is definitely more on the left side. You said DSA is a wide tent. She's more on the left side, I would say, of that tent within the DSA in terms of at least her statements in the past and all that kind of stuff. Now, I don't personally have much issue with activists saying things because they're activists, and that was her life. And then she became a politician and she had to change, which she clearly has. But how do people deal with this electability argument now that someone who came from the activist left, where she was posting all kinds of things that when Mondani ran, he took all those posts down. When Abdul El-Sayed ran, he took down all those posts. She left them up there. She said, judge me on everything. Fine.
Yeah.
So this electability argument in Wisconsin, why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I'll say a few things about Wisconsin. And the first thing I want to say is one issue we didn't talk about is candidate quality. The other thing that you need to factor in is whether you're running more from, on a moderate stance or more from the left. Candidate quality really matters. If you run a crappy candidate from the left, you're going to lose. If you run a crappy candidate from the center, you're probably going to lose. Abdul Al-Sayed happens to be a really, really high quality candidate, which is one of the reasons why I think he is, in a good position to be at highly competitive in Michigan and has a good shot of winning. Now, the thing of Francesca Hong, which is interesting, is I've been paying close attention. She has remarkably strong candidate skills in all sorts of ways. She's a remarkably effective candidate. She's a brilliant retail politician. One of the reasons she is running such a strong campaign is she spent over a year doing like small retail gatherings all over Wisconsin. And you hear these stories, you meet her and you're like, I want to vote for you. I want to work on your campaign. And she's also developed into a very effective political communicator. So on the one hand, she has the candidate skills and she's a high quality candidate. She wouldn't be in the position she is if that wasn't true. I actually think her number one challenge as a candidate isn't so much those tweets in and of themselves. If you know Wisconsin politics, if you are highly associated with Milwaukee or Madison, it makes it hard to run statewide. Because a lot of people in small town rural Wisconsin just kind of discount Milwaukee and Madison and say they don't understand us. And I think that the challenge she has is that in many ways she typifies a lot of how people view Madison. And if she is stereotyped as, oh, she's the Madison candidate, that will be the challenge she has to overcome. And the question is she a skillful enough candidate that she can overcome being pigeonholed as the Madison candidate? And I'll share one thing which suggests to me that she understands that, and it's an indication of her savvy. She was asked this morning by, I think it was somebody from the national press. I forget which outlet it was. She was asked, what's the first thing you're going to do as governor?
Yeah, I saw this. Yep.
And her answer was, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call a special session of the state legislature to enact a 2-year moratorium on data centers. And the data center issue is like wildfire in rural Wisconsin and also rural Minnesota. And the fact that the answer she gave suggests to me that she knows that to win, she can't just be seen as the Madison candidate. She has to run in a way that conveys, I get small town and rural Wisconsin. That is, I think, her main challenge. The fact that she's a Democratic socialist, I don't think that's the big challenge. I think Wisconsin's the kind of state where there are plenty of people, including in small town and rural Wisconsin, who are fine with electing a Democratic socialist. It's more a question of, are you Madison or are you bigger than Madison? And I think that's the challenge she needs to overcome.
Well, to your point, those retail politics served her so darn well, because I think a lot of people weren't the data center issue for a lot of, especially city-based politicians like Madison,
Yep.
Milwaukee, the Twin Cities. It wasn't on a lot of people's radar, but some of these politicians like Abdul Al-Sayed, who was doing a lot of those listening tours, like
Yep.
you're describing, Francesca Hong, they got wind of it a lot sooner than a lot of other politicians. So when they had a Democratic Party debate, they had people raise their hands, who's against data or who wants to do a moratorium on data centers. She was the only Democrat,
The only one.
To raise her hand.
And I suspect that she will, again, we want to be somewhat cautious with polling, but the polling I've seen from Wisconsin surprisingly shows that she runs as strongly in rural Wisconsin. In fact, she's running stronger in rural Wisconsin than in Milwaukee. Like for obvious reasons, Madison is where she's running the best. But she's actually running more strongly in rural Wisconsin than in Milwaukee. And I think the reason for that is exactly what she said. She got out into rural Wisconsin. She got out in a small town Wisconsin, did a lot of real retail politics, heard what people were saying, and seized that issue. And the other advantage she has running from the left is that she doesn't have to worry about alienating the utility companies. One of the reasons that the more centrist Democrats are afraid to take on the data center issue is they're afraid of alienating the utility companies, which are the local interests that have the biggest stake in data center construction. She doesn't care. She knows that, the utility companies are never going to back her. So she has the freedom to take the popular side of the data center issue.
Right. And we're seeing this play out in Minnesota with the Angie Craig race. We saw it play out in Michigan with the William Lawrence race and Abdul El-Sayed. And frankly, even in that downtown Detroit district where a DSA candidate, Donovan McKinney, knocked off an incumbent
Correct.
Democrat, Sri Tanadar. But so it's, if all they got, and when I say they, I'm really referring to the Republicans, because what's really fascinating about I watch enough Fox News to know what they're saying. And they're bringing people on to make the argument, and I'm going to make a parallel to the rise of the Tea Party movement in a moment here, but they're making the argument that, if these Democrats dare elect people like Francesca Hong or Abdul El-Sayed, or sometimes Peggy Flanagan gets dragged into that, but they almost never bring up Minnesota, then that's going to doom the Democrats. This is coming from Republicans. It's like, thank you for your advice. But it reminds me of when MSNBC kept saying the same thing. If you elect these Tea Partiers, you're going to doom the Republican Party. And those outlets got a lot of Democrats believing that.
That's right.
If they elect these people, they'll never win. And then we got Trump. And so now the Republicans are in the position. Fox News is doing what MSNBC did back in the day. I think it's fascinating. I really do.
And I will say this, that here's the dynamic. And again, this goes back to why I say that her number one challenge is overcoming the perception of being the Madison candidate. I mean, for decades, the central appeal of the right in rural areas, including the upper Midwest, is that Democrats are culturally alien. They don't understand you. They're not like you. They're these big city elitists who look down their noses at you. They're culturally alien. You can't trust them because those people don't respect us. And that was the heart of Trump's appeal to rural America. And it's the way Republicans have been running in rural America for actually decades.
Yes.
And on the one hand, Francesca Hong seemed almost tailor-made to run that kind of campaign against. But on the other hand, if you look what's going on, after selling rural and small town voters on that message for decades, the actual policies of the Trump administration are not only not helping, the rural Midwest, they're actually intensifying the generational crisis of the rural and small town Midwest. I mean, the tariff policy is actually deepening the crisis of the rural Midwest, which creates an opening for a candidate that actually says, you know what, for decades, the policies of both parties have been basically flushing our small towns and rural areas down the toilet. And the question is, can a candidate like Francesca Hong, with a message of basically saying, look, I get it, and I'm actually going to reverse the policies that have been basically just, ruining our rural communities and our small town communities, will she get a hearing for that message, even though in some ways she's a stereotypical Madison candidate?
Right. So let's kind of the DSA is obviously making all these moves within the Democratic Party, which has caused certain people, like former head of the DNC, Jamie Harrison, to say things like, if you don't like Democrats, get the hell out of the party. And he never addresses the fact that it's Democratic voters who are picking these candidates. I mean, he's blaming the voters for the success of the DSA within the Democratic Party, which, fair enough, whatever. So what's kind of like, let's kind of wrap it up with a message. What would be your message, or a message that the DSA has for people who are concerned, like Bill Maher, who is no friend to the left, says that the DSA is, quote, colonizing, which, considering that the DSA so many of the candidates that are winning are people of color.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really gross thing to say, but fine. Respond to that?
Well, the first thing, and I really want to stress this about DSA, as we said at the beginning, it's a big tent organization that is seeking to be a home for the broad left. DSA as an organization actually it's not a political party, and it has no official position on operating within the Democratic Party or outside the Democratic Party. There are people within DSA who want nothing to do with the Democratic Party. There are people in DSA who see working within the Democratic Party as a viable strategy within what essentially by law is a two-party system. So with that said, it's not that DSA is quote unquote colonizing the Democratic Party. It's that a lot of people within DSA who are interested in electoral politics have chosen to put that energy into running candidates within the Democratic Party. And in a two-party system where essentially by law you're given an option of these two parties, that number one, that's people's democratic right. It's people's democratic right. And people who are made uncomfortable by that have two choices. Either fight it and marginalize yourself within your own party, or try to build constructive coalitions with people to your left. And if you look at what happened in Michigan after El Sayed, who again is not DSA, but there's some similar dynamics, when he won, he reached out as someone who understands coalition politics and said, we need to unite. And Haley Stevens, as someone who understands coalition politics, said, we need to unite. That's the way the American political system works. We forge our coalitions within these broad umbrella parties. We're not a multi-party system where you can have your socialist party and your centrist party and you form the coalition after the election. In the American system, you form your coalitions within the two parties. And the DSA wing of the Democratic Party is here to stay. And other groups within the Democratic Party have a choice as to whether they want to forge relationships with that wing or not. But the DSA wing is here to stay. And the last thing I'll say on this is, for a number of years, I was in the Green Party. And from that concluded that, again, because of the legal landscape in the United States, the third party strategy is a dead end, I concluded. But I remember I was in the Green Party. The establishment people within the Democratic Party were always screaming at us saying, you're going to split the vote. You belong in the Democratic Party. And now, not all, and I give the people who really meant it credit that they're now happy that we're in the Democratic Party, but some of the same people are now basically saying, get out of our party. It's not your party, it's ours. In the American political system, the Democratic Party belongs to whoever shows up, and the Republican Party belongs to whoever shows up. And you can't have it both ways. You either want people to operate within those two parties to not split the vote, or you don't. You can't have it both ways. And I think it's better for all of us if we build a strong, effective, influential Democratic Socialist wing of the Democratic Party, and then forge our coalitions within the party. For me personally, I think that's a good strategy for all of us. And honestly, there are some people in DSA who don't agree with me, whose eventual goal is to try to create an independent left party. So we have these debates within DSA ourselves.
Well, that was really well said. So I don't want to muddy that with any other stuff. Joel, hopefully we can chat again after primary season, once we kind of know where all the chips have fallen, and revisit where things stand and where things might go. But thank you so much for doing that deep dive with me. I really, really appreciate having you on.
Well, I was happy to do it, and thanks for having me.